do this heavy lifting. And this is where I came into the picture. It was in this context that Sanusi headhunted me and recommended me to President Umaru Musa Yar'adua for appointment as his deputy. I did not know him before. He was not my cousin. We were not from the same ethnic group. We were not even of the same religion. But he was clear that you are the person I believe I need for this job. Today, of course, many people know me in the context of my now being a politician, but I can tell you a personal testimony that although I had a career in the United Nations for 17 years, that many people consider a successful one, if I had not had the opportunity to serve our country alongside Khalifa Muhammad Sanusi II, I would not be doing what I'm doing today. Few people have touched my life the way he has. In so many ways, that is a separate lecture itself. He has been so influential in my life, and I truly appreciate you, Khalifa Sanusi II. Sanusi was able, it's not my intention here to go into the technical details of the financial system reforms in an audience that is largely non-technical. But what I want to do is to highlight the factors that made the reforms necessary, the principles that drove the reforms, the main headline reforms, and to undertake an assessment of how these reforms have held up, including, as is natural with these kinds of transformations, an assessment of criticisms also of the reforms. Why were these reforms necessary? There were 5 main reasons. The first was the consolidation of Nigerian banks that took place between 2004 to 2005. When the then governor, Chukwuma Soludo, said, and the central bank said, that all the banks in Nigeria, there were about 89 banks then, would have to move from a minimum capital requirement of 2 billion naira to 25 billion naira within 18 months. Many banks had to scramble, and many felt that the time was too short. The second factor was the global financial crisis, which affected Nigeria through its second round effects. The global financial crisis affected Nigeria because it caused a drop in the price of oil. And the capital market of Nigeria, which was booming before the crisis, also suffered heavily. Many banks were exposed. They were lending people what we call margin lending people money to buy shares. Nigerians believed that the stock market would only go up. They didn't understand that it can also come down. So people were buying shares like there was no tomorrow. But when the financial crisis hit, everybody was exposed. When the oil price crashed from $147 a barrel to $47 a barrel, Nigeria was naked, exposed, nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. These events had huge, stressful consequences and impacts on the Nigerian financial system. If this great man had not intervened, many of us here would have lost the savings of our lives. So we had the consolidation of banks, we had the global financial crisis, and then third, we had weak corporate governance and weak risk management. This is where his background as a risk manager comes into play. That single factor was, of course, what Governor Tambuwal reminded us about: his activism, his desire to bring change in every situation he finds himself, and change for the better, not for the worse, was very instrumental to his success, the success of the bank, and the success of all of us. So, the banks were not governed in Nigeria at the time, with very few exceptions. You are supposed to have a board of directors exercising supervisory authority over the management of a bank. But our managing directors in those days of our banks were emperors, and the boards of directors were merely their appendage. They would appoint you to the board if they felt you could be useful to them. And so many board members could not be independent. Many of these banks were operating scams. Many of them were into pure fraud. The managing directors would go and set up shell companies, fake companies, and be lending money, shareholders' funds, depositors' funds, to those fake companies. This is stealing. Let me just be simple about it. Because there was no oversight, there was no corporate governance, the risks were not properly managed. Here came the risk manager to take care of this situation. The other reason was that there was also a very weak regulatory environment. The central bank was so focused on the consolidation that many people believed that somehow its eye went off the ball. And many of these banks that we are trying to show that they have moved from 2 billion naira to 25 billion naira were engaged in the building of what we call bubble capital. The 25 billion they were presenting on their books, many of them, it was not real. Some of that money was from unauthorized sources. And when you have this type of situation, you have the makings of financial instability and financial crisis. So, it wasn't just the global financial crisis that affected Nigerian banks. We had a homegrown banking crisis as well that stemmed from the absence of risk management and corporate governance in Nigerian banks. So, what were the principles that drove the reforms that Sanusi led? One was trust in banking, and trust and banking. Governor Sanusi then would remind us that the reason people put their money in a bank is that when they go there, they believe that when they go to the bank, they will get their money. This is a core principle of banking, trust. You are putting your money in somebody else's hands to keep it for you, that when you come there, you will find your money. This is a very important, basic principle that drove the banking reforms that Governor Sanusi led. The second principle was financial stability. He emphasized systemic risk, the risk that was interconnected between the big banks especially, that if one bank failed, one big bank, confidence in the banking system would be lost, and people will go to the bank, rush to the bank to begin to draw their money down. And this destroys trust, it destroys confidence, and you have what we call a run on the banks. That's how banking systems collapse. So he believed that we had to look at this not from the perspective of just one bank, but from the perspective of what happened to one bank, the impact it can have on the whole system. That is what we call systemic risk to the financial system. This was a driving principle of the reform. The third principle deriving from this was that Governor Sanusi and all of us agreed at the time, no bank will fail. No bank will fail. No depositor will lose one kobo of his or her money. This is very important. Those of us who are old enough to remember the failed banks in the 90s, when many people lost their life savings, some people had strokes, some people had hypertension. The crooked bankers that led to these scams were rewarded with appointments as ambassadors. Some became senators, others became all other things. But the people whose money they have managed badly suffered. Governor Sanusi was determined that this would not happen under his watch. The fourth principle was an emphasis on governance and risk management of banks. The fifth principle was on banking models. In the consolidation, every bank had to have a minimum of 25 billion naira in capital. This seemed a little bit unnatural. Because if you go to every country of the world, you will have big banks, mega banks. You have big banks, you have medium-sized banks, you have small banks. Everyone according to his size. So he decided, and we all agreed, discussed and agreed, that there will be a new banking model in Nigeria, where we will have mega banks with global affiliates and global subsidiaries, national banks, and regional banks. And then we would have specialized banks, including what was referred to earlier, what my brother was speaking about, but he didn't quite call it by name, the introduction of non-interest banking, i.e. Islamic banking. I had the task as the head of the Financial System Stability Directorate of the Central Bank, leading the implementation of these reforms to roll out Islamic banking in Nigeria. I am not a Muslim, but the reason we did it was to expand financial access to people who did not like the idea of riba. But in a charged political environment, I took a lot of bullets with my head, including at the National Assembly, in front of the Speaker. Aminu Waziri Tambuwa. I accompanied the governor. I think all of us deputy governors were there. It was one battle in many battles in a long war of 5 years. And I am glad to say that we won the war. I don't know if we lost any battle. We won the war. General Khalifa, Muhammad Sanusi II, we won the war. I am proud. I'm proud to have been a major general in your army. You were the general. I was a major general. So I remember all the bishops in the southern part of the country were calling me, so you're now the one to Islamize Nigeria, you? And I would smile and say, no, this is not the idea. This is a financial product, period. Don't read meanings into it because of the nature of our politics. And I'm glad to see that many of those Islamic banks have done very well. I was coming to Kano one day and I saw the managing director of one of them. He called everybody around and said, this is the man that made it possible for us to have this Islamic bank. So, and I say to people today, to tell you how unnecessarily excited you people always become in this country. How many people today have become Muslims specifically because of Islamic banking? Can you count? They cannot answer. So, Sanusi brought a lot of reforms. Another reform, another principle that drove the reforms was the principle of accountability. That when you break the law, there must be consequence. And the Central Bank of Nigeria was the first in the world to call bankers to account. Massive reform. People who felt they were untouchable. Bankers who sat in smoke-filled rooms and decided who would be the next president. And they thought it was business as usual. They did not count. on Muhammadu Sanusi II. But we brought some of them to account. There were trials. I think a couple of them have ended with convictions. So it wasn't, it wasn't made up. Evidence was brought and they were convicted. The other principle, number 7 principle, central bank independence. Central bank independence. I don't want to get controversial, but let me just say that in our time at the Central Bank of Nigeria was an independent central bank. No question about it, no apologies about it. I know how much pressure we were under from politicians. Oh, lower the interest rate, and we have to educate them about fighting inflation. Oh, why are you, we introduced the POS, and one very powerful political figure in the Southeast saw my in-laws and told them, go and warn your in-law, Kingsley Moghalu, what is he doing? I can't give bribe with a POS. Doesn't he understand? Which one is POS? And he said it in Igbo. It's a POS and a bribe. You can't give bribe with a POS. You should stop that nonsense. So, the central bank was independent. We took the actions and the decisions that were in the best interest of our financial system and of the Nigerian people. The final principle that drove the reforms was strategy. Strategy. We took a strategic approach to everything we did in the central bank. Governor Sanusi knew and impressed on all of us, we have 5 years. I'm not interested in a second term. We have 5 years and we have a lot to achieve. We have to plan it down and strategize with a series of actions and driving forces to make sure. And every year we will go for an annual board retreat and committee of governors retreat and check our progress. That is why we were able to do so much in 5 years. One of the reasons I am seeking the presidency of Nigeria is to run Nigeria the way Sanusi ran the central bank. With strategy, results, not just dancing on the stage in the name of politics. Let me highlight very briefly the reforms. The first was what I call a decisive intervention. Governor Sanusi intervened to stabilize the weak banks after an audit of the banks that he ordered immediately he came in as governor. That audit found out that several of those banks, or at least between 5 to 7 of them, were wobbly. And if there was no intervention, they would have collapsed. So, what did he do? He injected, I think it was 620 billion naira at the time, to stabilize the banks as liquidity support for the banks. Many people in Nigeria who did not understand the principle of central bank independence, that the central bank is a banker of last resort, and that the act authorizes it to do that. We're saying, why would you do that without the approval of the National Assembly? And we explained, this is not an appropriation. This is not a fiscal matter. This is a financial stability issue, and the central bank has the authority to stabilize the banks and to be a lender of last resort to the government of the country. And they understood. So those banks were saved. And to say one more thing about that decision, we recovered those injections with profit. The central bank recovered all of it with profit. So it wasn't even a loss. It was like a business investment. Many people don't know this. Now, then the next was the Sanusi tsunami, as they called it, the Sanusi tsunami. The Caliph Muhammadu Sanusi, Governor Sanusi as he then was, fired 5 bank MDs in one day. He called them to his office and handed them their letters. He called them to his office and handed them their letters. There was weeping and gnashing of teeth. I can tell you, Nigeria had never seen a thing like this. A sheriff, a real sheriff, not some other sheriffs, a real sheriff, had actually come to town. And people who thought they were beyond the law were brought to account. Then we established AMCO. the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. I call this the Great Stabilization. The purpose of AMCON was to take away all the toxic loans on the books of the bank balance sheets and manage those loans, removing the toxic assets, non-performing loans from the books of the banks, so that the banks can now lend again, so that the banks were clean and could begin to do business with confidence and inspire confidence. AMCON was also to help to recapitalize some weak banks whose capital had dropped below zero, and it did all these things. We went to Malaysia together, where we studied this principle. This is what I talked about, having a global mindset, the ability to know what's going on around the world that can be useful to your country, to tap it, bring it home, adapt it, and put it into play. That's what we did with AMCON, and it worked. We had so many other reforms, corporate governance reforms. Thank you. Corporate governance reforms, 10-year rule for CEOs. We said you cannot be a bank MD for more than 10 years. This was obviously a very controversial decision. We had consumer protection. We brought new things like consumer protection, that if banks are charging you and ripping you off, you can complain to the Central Bank of Nigeria, and we established a desk that will take care of it. I was also in charge of this as part of the financial system stability. Before I left the bank, we had recovered 14 billion naira wrongly charged to Nigerians, returned to their accounts. What was the impact of these reforms? The stability and confidence in the Nigerian financial system was restored. Foreign investment began to come back into Nigeria. People who had run away thinking that the financial system would collapse. Everywhere we went in the world, Governor Sanusi and I went for one meeting in I think it was Germany, the Unofficial Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, UNFIF, and the governor of the Central Bank of Ireland said to me, Kingsley, can you show us how we can fire bank MDs, corrupt bank MDs, and put them on trial? Can you just teach us how you people did it and got away with it? So these are the kinds of things. Confidence in the Nigerian economy increased. Because when you know that the financial system is stable, then you will feel encouraged to invest in that economy. Confidence was restored. Second, I've talked about increased foreign investment. Fintech, financial technology today, big in this country, huge. The reforms that we undertook under the overall leadership of Governor Sanusi made the fintech revolution possible because of all the reforms we brought into the payment systems. So these were some of the impacts that we had. Now, what were some of the criticisms before I wrap up? Shareholders. Many people do not understand the nature of banking. As Governor Sanusi will say, you can set up a brewery, you can set up a tailoring shop, you can set up a cement factory, and you will not be bothered as much as if you set up a bank. Because banking is doing business with other people's money. 80% of the funds that the bank does business with is depositors' funds. And because of that, banking is the most regulated industry in the world. But in their usual manner, many Nigerians did not understand this. They saw it as just another business. I invested, I'm a shareholder. But we decided that the depositor will be king. And if investors made the wrong decisions, they could lose their shares. So this was a criticism of the reforms, but it came from a place of lack of understanding. That the depositor, innocent man or woman who came to a bank, trusting the bank that when you go there, you'll get your money back and put your money there, we cannot allow you to lose your money. I'm wrapping up. Just give me one privilege as the keynote speaker. I'll be done very shortly, as the guest speaker. So, another criticism that we have often heard is that, that Governor Sanusi was pursuing a personal vendetta against some of his colleagues in the banks. But the fact of the matter is that if the EFCC or any other agency of accountability or a regulatory body finds that you have committed infractions and decides to pursue you, it is the evidence that is driving those actions. It's not personal. Thank you. Thank you. So then the other criticism that we have heard is that of moral hazard. If the central bank is protecting the banks from failure, does it mean that no bank will ever fail again in Nigeria? Will this not make bankers reckless when they're doing business, knowing that the central bank will come to the rescue? This is something to be considered and, for us to think about in the long term. But these reforms have helped to stabilize the Nigerian financial system. Without a doubt, that is the judgment of everybody in this country. And so to conclude, what did the Sanusi reforms of the banking and financial system in Nigeria show? They showed two very important things. One, that Nigeria can succeed. Institutions can be run successfully. That's what they showed. That it's not all doom and gloom. That if you get the right people, they can do the right thing. And the consequences will be obvious to all and sundry, and the benefits will be enjoyed by all. That's number one. Number two is that Nigeria set the standard globally, and people were looking at what we were doing under Sanusi and coming to learn and to copy what we were doing. It is not often that you find an African country or an African-led institution setting the trail, blazing the trail in a worldwide context. Muhammad Sanusi II did it. For that reason and many more, I am proud of you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak a little bit about the report. Thank you.